Hi, everybody, and welcome to our third Careers in Film and Technology webinar. My name is Carol Payne, and I work for Netflix, but more importantly for this webinar series, I am a co-chair along with Rachel Rose of our Diversity and Inclusion Working Group at the Academy Software Foundation. Want to welcome everybody here tonight around the world, wherever you are. We'd love for you to say hello in the chat and say where you're coming from and just get excited. We've got a great webinar coming up today. Like I said, it is the third. This is the third in our series. So if this is your first time joining us, feel free to go back through, watch the recordings of the previous two. And then we still have a couple more coming up over the next month or so-ish, month and a half. And we're really excited about tonight and the other webinars coming up. Speaking of tonight, we have a great lineup for you coming from a couple different areas of the industry. We have with us Mallory King from Apple, who's had an incredible career. She has 20 years of experience with animation and visual effects studios such as Disney, Pixar, Lucasfilm. She's won 2 Emmys for her CG supervisor and engineering work at Baobab Studios. She has a large background and she's going to tell you a lot more about it. But she currently works for Apple on the Pro Workflow team, where she helps leverage her technical and creative backgrounds to improve the Apple ecosystem for audio, video, and visual effects professionals. So we're really excited to hear from Mallory tonight. We also have with us Tracy Priest from Blue Sky Studios. We're just super excited. Her career spans over 10 years and has helped build technology behind multiple films, including Ice Age 4, Rio 2, and most recently Spies in Disguise. She has an MS in computer graphics and motion technology from DePaul. And we're really just excited to have her talk about her career tonight and everything that she's got going on. And then lastly, we have Furby Kramer, who's an engineer and an artist and also an amazing student. She's working on her PhD in computer science, and that is just crazy. And we're excited to have her here to talk about her experience navigating the world of being really interested in visual effects and creativity, and how that translates to the world of education and what you can get out of your university if you're interested in pursuing these careers. So we're really excited to have the speakers with us tonight. And with that said, we will have a Q&A session at the end of all of our presentations. And so if you would please, if you have a question for any of the panelists throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A box in Zoom. Feel free to chat and talk in the chat box. But if you have a question you'd like answered at the end, type it in the Q&A. We'll get to as many as we can at the end of our session. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mallory to take it away.
Okay. All these buttons to push.
There we go.
Okay.
Feel free to turn on your camera too if you'd like.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we can see your face.
I lost my cursor. There we go. Can you see me?
There we go. Yes, there you are. All right.
Okay.
Have fun.
So, hi, everybody. My name is Mallory King, and I have been a technical director in the past, though my titles have changed many times over the years. Now it's not happy. There we go. Okay, so about me. So, revealing my age a little bit, I started in tech support at Disney in 1995. And before that, I had worked in government radio systems at Motorola. And last month, I was diagnosed with ADHD and ASD. So I'm kind of still absorbing all of this, but you'll kind of see how the ADHD and ASD affected my career trajectory in a lot of ways. For school, I went to UC Berkeley for undergrad, where I studied electrical engineering and computer science. For grad school, I went to UC Santa Barbara, where I did a master's in computer engineering. So I didn't really have a whole lot of formal artistic training. It was mostly an engineering thing, but I decided I wanted to work in visual effects and animation because that was something I loved a lot. And in 1995, I got my foot in the door at Disney. So briefly, a work history. So started at Motorola, and then I went to Disney, where I worked in tech support and then software. And then after that, I wanted to get into production and become more of an artist. And I managed to get into Pixar around the time of Toy Story 2. A little bit after The Incredibles, I joined a startup called Fluid, which didn't last very long, but it was trying to do a little startup animation studio. And then went back to Disney for a number of years, where I helped modernize a lot of the pipeline there. And then Disney bought Pixar. And in that whole shakeup, I got shaken loose and ended up at Lucasfilm, where I worked in the animation division and partnered a lot with ILM on a lot of things. But mainly I was supporting a feature film there and Clone Wars, the TV series. And then Disney bought Lucasfilm. So I got let go again, and I ended up doing some consulting work for my own company. That's what Torchseer is on the bottom. And I had a bunch of clients, and I built some pipelines for studios in New Zealand and other places. And after doing that for a while, I joined Baobab, which is a VR animation startup. And that's where I helped them get their first project made. And we won an Emmy for it. It was called, Invasion. And it was one of the sort of early VR shorts when VR was really taking off. Then I did a bunch of other stuff, and eventually ended up here at Apple, where I'm working in the Pro Workflow group, where I get to exercise a lot of my technical background, but I also get to exercise my creative background, because again, we have to know how people do their jobs as professional video, audio, and visual effects people. But we also have to understand the technology behind it so we can make our hardware and software perform better for everybody. Okay, so in my day-to-day across the years, I started in production software at Disney. And this is still when people were doing the hand-drawn animation. So it was, caps, it was digital, but we were integrating 3D computer graphics, but we had to make it look hand-drawn. So one of the big projects that I did there was write an Inkline renderer. So that's that picture from Atlantis there. So basically we would take computer geometry and figure out how would a person draw that, but make the computer do it instead. And so it was a huge software project that I did with a bunch of other people. We also supported Deep Canvas for Tarzan. And we started to go into more photoreal computer graphics with Dinosaur. And for that production, I worked on a lot of the data translators, for instance, lighting tools that had to go from our proprietary system into RenderMan for the final imaging. Once I was in software for a while, I always wanted to do more of the artistic work, but it was hard to kind of jump into production without some production experience. So I ended up making a short film with a bunch of people after hours and ended up using that as a demo reel and got into Pixar for Toy Story 2, where I became a shading TD. And what a shading TD does, TD is short for technical director. It's not like a director role. It is basically a sort of like a technical artist kind of role. TD means something different almost at every different studio. It's kind of like in the UK, they call chips and crisps, but here we call them French fries and chips. Anyway, so it's one of those things where you kind of have to figure out the context. So a shading TD writes code to tell the computer how surfaces react to light. So that's the color, the reflectivity, how shiny things are, how dirty they might be. And it requires you to kind of understand both what you're trying to do artistically, but then understand some of the math and computer programming to make the computer do those things in an efficient way. After I did shading for a while, I wanted to work more on shots, the final pictures that show up on screen, because as a shading TD, you're working on individual things like Mike Wazowski, just his skin, or a roll of packing tape, you know. But I wanted to get more into understanding, you know, the storytelling aspect of the images that we're working on. So lighting is a lot like physical lighting in the real world for movies. You have actors and a set and an environment, and you're trying to place lights so that the audience is looking in the right place at the right time. You're setting time of day, you're setting the mood, and it can be a really fun experience, but it can also be a lot of work because the scenes over the years are just getting heavier and heavier, which means more render time. For a little while, when I was at Fluid, I was an effects TD. And an effects TD helps people with, I was going to say realistic phenomenon, but it's more just like anything that's not really the characters. So in this case, I did some effects rigs that other artists could use to make snow blow up. So for this helicopter crash and Day After Tomorrow, they used some of my tools for that. An effects TD at Disney might do something like pixie dust, not necessarily something realistic, but still something that is, you know, not the character animation, but still has to be part of the storytelling and fit into that world that they're creating. After I was a TD for a while, I became a sequence team lead at Pixar for The Incredibles, and that was trying to figure out how are we going to make this huge movie that was very different from what we had done before, right? We had superheroes, we had human characters, we had clothing and hair, skin, lots of effects and action sequences. So what we had to do was we had to come up with a different way of approaching how we produced our environments and our sets, how we constructed shots. And in this case, for example, the foreground characters of E and Helen were done in a proprietary system that Pixar uses, but the background, because it had to be done very quickly, was done in things like 3D Studio Max and rendered in V-Ray or out of Maya directly. And we combined those things in a much more visual effects way, because that was a way we can make production more efficient and actually keep the production quality high, but still deliver on time and on budget. When I went back to Disney, I became a CG supervisor. And so that was a little bit more high level, and I used a lot of the experience that I had before from all these different departments to figure out how do we approach the production pipeline, which is how the artists end up sharing work with each other across different departments. How does each artist in a department do their task and do that more efficiently? For one example, you know, when we opened a scene file before we started the revamp of the pipeline, it could take up to a half an hour for an artist to hit open, and then they'd have to wait for the scene to load before they could work. And we cut that down to, you know, a minute or two by the end of that. And the other thing I did was also work with all of the department heads to figure out how they could work more efficiently with the departments that depended on their work and the departments that they were depending on. So having a big understanding of the overall process, not just the artistic, but also understanding software, understanding some of the system admin work and how databases work and how that fit into production tracking and finance. And it can get kind of overwhelming, but by this time I'd been in the business for a while, so it wasn't too overwhelming, but it was eye-opening to see things from a different perspective than I had before. Excuse me. Okay, so after I was a CG supervisor at Disney, I went and became a VR supervisor at Baobab. And it's basically a lot of the same things I had been doing before, except now in real time instead of offline rendering, which you could take anywhere from 30 minutes to like a week to render a shot. Here now, we had to render every frame in, I forget, like 90 frames a second, which is something like 11 milliseconds. So it's a whole other challenge. And our experiences had to fit in not just PC, like VR rigs, but also in like Gear VR and other sorts of not as performant VR equipment. Okay, so when I started doing pipeline development actually on my own. So one of the things I did in consulting was Thunderbirds. I built their previs pipeline for them. And we also did a lot of pipeline work for Clone Wars. And one of the things that happened during Clone Wars was a bunch of us were talking about how hard it was to get editorial information. So those are the people that decide, how long a shot is and what the shot order is, and how to tell a story with a certain rhythm. So they have to share that timing information with a lot of other departments, but getting that information out of something like Avid or Premiere is actually kind of tough. So what happened was, after we had all sort of drifted away from Lucasfilm Animation, some of the people that I worked with picked up those seeds again and started an Academy Software Foundation project called Open Timeline IO, which is actually addressing a lot of those pain points that we had hit years before. And now I am kind of a generalist at Apple. So I'm building a pipeline again, but I'm also doing creative work. Like yesterday, I was drawing storyboards for an upcoming production that we're working on. That's an internal one. It's not going to be seen outside, but it's something that we're developing to test all phases of professional work so that we basically see what the experience is for somebody that's not at a big studio using Apple hardware and software, as well as other tools to figure out how do we make that overall experience smoother and better for everybody. Okay, how am I doing? Oh, I'm going over time. So getting started. One of the things that we use every day right now is Python. It's kind of a de facto standard in the VFX industry. Most of the DCCs out there have some sort of Python scripting, and a lot of the automation and things that we do is also built around Python libraries. Another thing that comes in handy is system administration and IT work. I've had to do backups. I've had to install new OSs. I've had to do upgrades. I've had to build stuff from source and distribute it. And a lot of times machines will go down and you have to figure out why, especially if you're in a support role. A bonus is if you can do C or C++ programming, because there's a lot of things that are maybe not as performant to do in a scripting language such as Python. And if you can program in C and C++, that gives you a big leg up in a lot of ways. Oh, like I said, building from source. Okay. The other thing about getting started in this sort of business is it's very useful to learn how to communicate with artists using their language. So understanding how a painter would describe what they're doing, or a photographer, a cinematographer would describe what they're doing, and be able to talk about things in terms of shots and camera lenses and composition and all those kinds of things, because then that helps you understand how they're using whatever you're developing as far as tools, and that helps you build better tools for everybody. So like I said, photography and cinematography is huge in computer graphics, because ultimately that's what we're showing to everybody at the end of the day. But a lot of those concepts in photography and cinematography, come from painting, as far as contrast and value and how to set a mood and all those kinds of things. We also deal a lot with motion. So understanding how things are animated, how character animators approach their craft, how effects animators approach their craft and simulate physics and things like that. It's always nice to know that you can talk to people in their, because every department has their own jargon. So sometimes one of the things that it took me a long time was to sort of learn the glossary of what everybody was talking about when I first started. The other thing is, as a TD, you're bouncing between the artistic and the technical. So it's really nice to learn a DCC, a digital content creation tool, something like Maya or Blender. Houdini Apprentice is also free. But if you're looking at paid things, Cinema 4D is really popular, especially with motion graphics people. And Maya is still a de facto standard in the industry as far as animation. The other thing that I found was really important over the course of my career is learning how to learn. You're never really done. Like, technology keeps moving ahead. And in our industry, not everything is documented well or at all, especially if you're dealing with something new that's proprietary. Like when I was shading hair on Monsters Incorporated for Boo, there was actually no documentation, and I had to kind of figure things out by examining what people had done before and tracking down people to talk to. And so learning how to navigate that and not being afraid of the unknown is really important in this kind of dynamic industry, because there's always something new. For instance, when I started at Pixar, we were still doing stuff with Sed and Awk and Perl. And eventually we started doing stuff in Mel, which is the Maya embedded language. And then the industry started to move towards Python. And right now I'm doing a lot more things in JavaScript because, web programming is getting so pervasive. One of the things I'd like to tell everybody also is you are not your code. You are not your work. That is a thing, but you're in a very big organization in the studio usually. And things change, right? The thing that you wrote today that might be useful, a year from now, we do hair entirely differently, or we do water sims entirely differently. So you kind of have to be able to let go of things as the industry changes. And the other thing is, because you are in an organization and other people are going to use the tools and things that you write, you're going to be subjected to code reviews in a lot of places. And again, it's not a personal criticism of you as a programmer. It's really just trying to look at how do we make this code, more robust, more fault tolerant, more performant, so that the studio is protected against downtimes, basically. So like art, code is never finished, just abandoned, because, like I said, time keeps marching on, and so does technology. Okay, I went a little bit over. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop my slides now and stop sharing. Okay.
Thank you so much, Mallory. That was great. Really, really awesome.
Thank you.
I'm amazed by your career and can't wait to hear more. We are now going to welcome Tracy. And Tracy's career is just as incredible, and I can't wait to hear. So Tracy, take it away.
Hi, my name is Tracy Priest, and I'm a production technology technical director at Blue Sky Studios. I have my bachelor's in information systems from Oklahoma Christian University and my master's in computer graphics and motion technology from DePaul University. My first job after grad school was at Walt Disney Animation Studios as a general TD trainee. And there I was able to work on a tool for modeling to publish turntables to Disney's proprietary media browser. And then also got to troubleshoot some issues for ABC's Prep and Landing to Naughty versus Nice. And then the past 9.5 years, I've been at Blue Sky Studios, where I started as a lighting TA, which at the time was basically a render wrangler position, where I managed jobs on the farm and updated their priorities based on the needs from the lighting leads and supervisors. I then quickly moved on to our production engineering team, where I wrote a lot of tools for many parts of the pipeline, from desktop apps for animation to use during their supervisor rounds, which was pretty cool for me because other departments, once they learned about this tool, wanted to use it. And I thought that was pretty exciting. And then also I've worked on tools for modeling, for publishing and QCing, as well as media submission tools for the entire studio. And then recently, in the past about 2 years, I transitioned into this technical director role, where I've been working mainly with our layout and stereo teams to help get them integrated into our new services-backed pipeline, and as we transition into a more USC-centered workflow. So I've been making tools that help layout artists interact easier with USC assets, as well as updating their QC tools to make sure that the data that they're exporting to downstream departments are optimized for the downstream departments to use. And also creating kind of a hub with the camera sequencer in Maya to be a place where layout can create cameras, create their shot nodes, play blast, and send back media to editorial as AAFs. And have had the fortune of working on many different films at Blue Sky, including 2 Ice Age films, the Peanuts movie, and most recently Spies in Disguise. So at Blue Sky, ProdTech TDs act as a liaison between production and research and engineering. We collaborate with artists and other technologists to create tools and workflows that allow artists to better perform their craft. Every day looks a little different. Some days are more artist-facing, where we're troubleshooting problems, tracking down bugs, answering questions regarding any number of issues, like their Maya file won't open, or Maya keeps crashing, or their camera didn't export as expected, or their animation isn't caching, even though it has keys in Maya, and even like my render frames are black. Why? Please help, please help. So we're really the front line of support for trying to figure out those problems and finding solutions. And we're also creating new tools that work inside of DCCs like Maya and Houdini, or that are standalone command line tools, and they can also be user interfaces. And these tools are usually either studio-wide pipeline tools or more show-based tools, depending on what project initiative you're on. So it's important to be able to clearly and effectively communicate with artists, production management, as well as other TDs and engineers. You may be fixing bugs in tools that you didn't write, so it's important to be able to have strong troubleshooting skills, as well as being able to work independently, but also contribute collaboratively. Production priorities can change quite often, so being able to be flexible and shift gears quickly is also key. Not to mention having strong programming abilities. I typically write code in Python and support our Maya-based departments, but we also have plugins that are in C++ and some legacy code that's still written in Perl. So having a strong understanding of object-oriented programming, or being able to quickly learn a different language or debug a different language is a good skill to have as well. And a lot of our UIs are written in Qt or PySide, and we have a few people creating web applications, doing web dev. And then we use a variety of DCCs in our pipeline. Maya for modeling, rigging, layout, animation, and some tech anim. And Houdini for look dev, set assembly, effects, character effects, lighting, and then our look dev team also uses Substance Painter, and lighting team also uses Nuke for compositing. And each of these departments contribute an opinion back to the USD for either the asset or the shots. And we also use a wide variety of open source projects at Blue Sky. I've listed a few here, but an example of how we use open source, all of our final rendered images are EXRs, which we use OpenEXR for. And then we use OpenImageIO to embed metadata into those images. So that could be the render time, product information, or shotgun information. And then we use OpenGL to overlay that information on the image in a custom plugin for RV. And then we also have some folks contributing back to several different USD projects. I really enjoy being a TD. This middle ground kind of between artistic and technology is so cool for me. Like seeing the collaboration that happens between artists and technologists and management, and the things that we create from this is really magical, and it's a great space to be in. And if you're interested in this as a career goal, I recommend trying to get involved in any of the open source projects that the Academy Software Foundation back. This is a great way to get your feet wet in film technology, learning the technology that the different studios are using. And a lot of the people who are contributing to these projects are industry experts and super welcoming and helpful and ready to help explain things. But if you're not ready to start contributing to open source, like joining any of the working groups is also a great way to see how we're using these technologies. And then I also had a mentor give me some advice when I was starting out, and they told me to install Ubuntu on my personal machine and download Blender, which is an open source CG package, and find out what bugs people are experiencing and trying to fix those yourself. It's a great way to explore how the DCCs are working, and also learning more about the problems that people are experiencing with them. There are many different ways to be, many different technologies that you can use in film technology. So finding out what you like to do and what aspects of it excite you is important. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Tracy. That was really great. Next, Furby, you are up. Welcome to the stage, and I'm going to let you have at it.
Tracy set up basically my entire kind of set in a good minute summary, but let's just give it a little bit more of a concrete guideline, because I know it causes us a little bit of a hesitation when there's a lot to go into. So hi guys, I'm trying not to use up too much time because I already saw a lot of great questions coming in that are going to require a nice good talk through to give you guys a good answer. So I'm Furby. If you join us on the ASWF Slack, I will be your friendly neighborhood academic advisor if you have questions. I was diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia around the age of 7, and honestly, it's how I ended up where I'm at, because this kind of middle ground that we've been talking to you guys about is the only thing that will really keep me focused and going in a singular direction, rather than the ADHD being like, and we're going to go over here and then over here. And then that also looks really shiny, so let's go there too. And I'm like, we need a degree at the end of this. So computer graphics it was. I do a little bit of VR work, do a little bit of traditional computer graphics. And on the off chance I've got some free time, I like to do traditional art as well as computer art. So that's a portrait I did a couple years back. There's a whole story that goes behind it. I'm not going to bore you with it. Be a dabbler and a tinkerer. If you are into puzzles, you're already on a really great track. So how do you get started with all of this? And the best way to kind of get you off is this quote from Alice in Wonderland. So one day Alice came to a fork in the road and saw a Cheshire cat in a tree. Which road do I take? She asked. And his response was a question. Where do you want to go? I don't know, Alice answered. Then, said the cat, it doesn't matter. So what I'm getting at here is, before you really get anywhere with this, is you got to figure out what you're actually interested in. And once you figure out what part of this pipeline you want to really get involved with and feel like you can pursue, then the world's your oyster. You can find opportunities everywhere. And if you're still not looking for them or finding them, make your own. Everything's on the computer at this point. You've got friends, get on a Discord and just start making your own projects. So once you kind of figure some of that out, where are your school options at? If you haven't settled into a major yet, look for ones that have a STEAM major. So at my University of Florida, it's called Digital Arts and Science. At Rochester Institute of Technology, it's called Technical Artist. I think at University of Virginia, it's just straight up computer graphics. So it goes by a lot of different names. Same way technical director doesn't really have a set definition either. And your degree audit isn't a contract set in stone. So use your experiences to your advantage and decide, all right, if I already have a really great art background, let me dig in a little bit more to the technical, or dig even further and look at some of the applied physics that you want to maybe do because you want to go into the simulation side of technical director. So take like a fluid mechanics class. There's a lot of options. Start exploring. And take an art class, sculpture, figure drawing, pottery, you name it. Find a class, be it at your school or just the community around you, and start getting immersed in that world. And once you get there, then the language that they communicate by is going to just start coming naturally. To build a portfolio, the next thing you can kind of look at is game jams and hackathons. So this is where you kind of come together with your group of friends, and someone's going to start wearing the artistic hat a little bit more. Someone's going to be like the go-to lead developer. And then you just kind of mix and match, and it's a fast track kind of nucleus event where you're doing it all at once and getting really great experience. Social opportunities, these are going to be ones that don't immediately seem relevant. But never do your hobby in a silo. So if you really enjoyed LARPing or Dungeons and Dragons or figure drawing, go find a group and do it together. You'd be surprised who else is around. I got involved in a Nerf club on campus called Humans versus Zombies. And the person that was next to me that was just totally painting their Nerf blaster in the most intricate design possible was an aerospace engineer student. And I'm like, I would have never met these people if I hadn't gone out and done something a little out of the box, a little bit more creative and a little unexpected. Join a Discord. Warrior Painters is a really great server I found through my sister. It's all of the animators that work at Disney and Pixar and Lucasfilms just doing their day-to-day or drawing on their own. They'll go out as a group of friends pre-pandemic and just do live sketches. So get on there, even if you're just working on code, they don't care. They think it's fun. Community opportunities, go to your local playhouse. do an understudy. Just get involved and get involved sooner than later. I didn't because I was too self-conscious. So by being here, you guys already got a leg up. Look at startup companies. They're always looking for people who can wear multiple hats. It's a great way to just kind of practice your presentation skills, practice your communication. Local filmmakers, especially if you're in like the Bay Area, the Miami area, any of those kind of metropolitan hubs, you're gonna find them. And your friends, again, always go back to that community and support group you've built up and do it together. It'll be fun, frustrating, but fun. And then once you've got that path started like dug out, how do you strengthen your tools? If it's from the coding and technical side, Tracy mentioned specifically object-oriented programming. So I teach design patterns on some semesters at the University of Florida. And most of my course material I get out of your traditional textbooks, but also Refactoring Guru is a great open source site that's got all their material kind of written out in really nice plain English. And they've also got refactoring courses, design patterns courses. So if you're looking for more of the conceptual angle of code to kind of make you more mobile and more flexible when it comes to swapping between applications or languages, those are the skills you want to start building up. And then YouTube classes are a great one. Take it with a grain of salt. Everyone's got a special way of doing things, but at least it's a start. Tutorials are a great place to start as well. The best kind of way to do things is by mimicry. So all of your abstract artists typically start off doing master copies, building your foundations, and then from there, making your own out of it. Same applies to any sort of technical skill as well. So if you come into something that isn't well documented or documented at all, walk through, if they have a tutorial, walk through that. If they have a demo scene, go through that. If they don't have any of that, just start reading file by file and make your own map. Don't keep it in your head, but actually draw it out on a big roll of paper. And eventually you'll start putting the pieces together, and they might not have provided you with documentation, but you just wrote it yourself. It's not the prettiest, but it does the job. And then practice your communication with friends and family. So if you're familiar with the rubber ducky idea, one step higher up than talking to an inanimate object is one that's going to ask you questions. If you can get that person who doesn't code to understand your coding project or your coding problem, your communication skills are at the highest level. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So you're not the artist in this traditional sense that you're thinking of. You're not the one that's coming up with the character designs. And you're also not the genius in the R&D department that's developing the brand new simulation code. But where you are is the middle that makes both of those work together and get that final product on the screen. You're the big picture person. You're not the specialist, but you need to have the skills that both of those groups have to different degrees and bringing that together. And then be curious and do not be afraid to ask for help. The worst thing you can do is sit there with your questions and just be too afraid to ask. That doesn't help you, and it doesn't move the project along any faster. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Furby. I'm going to share my screen really quickly so we can go through a couple housekeeping things before we open it up for Q&A. We mentioned it a little bit at the beginning, but there's ways for you to get involved and stay involved. So we really want everybody to stay in touch. You can sign up via the mailing list. And then we also have on our ASWF, the Academy Software Foundation's Slack instance, and we have a specific channel for students. If you don't identify as a student, join anyway. We've got lots of other channels, but I like to think of all of us as students. So it doesn't matter if you're not an official student, come join us, chat with us, get to learn more about some of the projects that we're working on. We've got a lot of amazing people that are there to answer questions and be resources, and just be a community. And then next, the last thing I'm going to talk about before we do Q&A is our next webinar. It's really awkward to look at myself on a picture of this screen, but I'm talking at the next webinar. It's going to be color science, and I'm going to be speaking with one of my colleagues that we work on Open Color IO together, another Academy Software Foundation project, Michael Dolan from Epic Games. And really excited to hear what he has to say. And it's going to be a cool one because we work on a lot of different projects together. And so hopefully it'll be entertaining. And so come back in 2 weeks for that. That's 2 weeks from today, same time, same place. And with that, Q&A time. So if I could have the speakers join me back on the screen. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And yeah, there's been a lot of great Q&A through the whole talk, and Mallory and Tracy have been answering away at a couple of them, but I wanted to verbally answer and dig into a couple things in case people aren't catching what's getting answered on the Q&A. A couple good ones of like from Jason, you know, being from a tech and software background with minimal artistic background. Are there specific artistic skills? How should you dive into like learning the world of an artist?
So for me, I don't have an artistic background either. If you ask me to model or animate anything, it's gonna look like you know, your baby did it probably. So, but in my grad program, part of it was I took a modeling class, I took an animation class, and I took a texturing class. And that really gave me the basic foundations for what those departments do, and understanding like their workflows, and help me understand their workflows better. So as a technologist, I can use that knowledge to help make tools for them to ease their pain during the production process. I'm good at this.
So yeah, so when I started, I didn't really have any artistic background. I mean, I kind of drew for a hobby, but I didn't really, I didn't go to art school or anything. But I was always interested in art. And I think, like Furby was saying, it's like my ADHD, I kind of bounced between all of these things all the time anyway. And like when I was at Disney, I would take life drawing classes because they were open to everybody, even though my drawings weren't that great, especially when you're sitting next to like, Glenn Keane. Like, what am I doing? But, it's still fun and you still learn a lot, and you learn about how the artists think and what they're trying to achieve, which helps you understand how to build tools for them better, or how to make their process easier, because you know what their end goals are trying to be. So really any artistic background, even if it's not something you're trying to become an artist, just having some knowledge of that domain is really helpful.
It's the old walk a mile in someone else's shoes sort of thing of like, you're designing a car, you're going to drive it at least a little, you would hope. So it's different for every person, but I think that's really great. It's like, there's nothing wrong too with exploring and trying new things. And that goes for your entire career and not just your time as a student. So it's a bunch of fun. There's a couple questions, and I'm wondering if you guys could provide some more insight around, Mallory touched on it a bit, of, technical director being a very overloaded term at a lot of studios, and the difference between that and why you would choose that as opposed to a software developer, and try and help people kind of figure out where those distinctions lie. And I know that's a complicated question, but based on your experience.
I guess I can go first. So a technical director is different from a software developer in that the technical director is usually assigned to a particular production, where a software developer will often be in a research and development department or a specific tools department like lighting tools or renderers or something like that. And they're not attached specifically to, a show. And they're providing services for the studio at large, and they're very much more focused on coding and software engineering discipline kinds of things. Whereas a TD has that technical background and can write scripts, but also is working sort of within usually one department and really helping that department figure out how to make their process faster, better, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
I just was going to agree with that. And yeah, and say that for me, being on the closer side of the show is really exciting. Software engineering is exciting too. Like, it's a whole different bag of worms, I guess. But for me, it's nice to be like close with the artists and close with the show to see what and help with the needs of those.
Yeah, I guess a more concrete example is a software engineer that I knew at Disney wrote PTEX, like a new way to, do texture mapping. It was very, it's kind of related to a discipline, but, he was not a production person. He was much more of a computer scientist and an engineer. Whereas, a technical director in the shading department or the look department might figure out like, how do we manage all these hair caches, right? Because there's like that data can get really big. So it's kinds of different kinds of problems that people would be looking at.
Yeah, that's great. There's a couple questions around like how do you prepare? How would you prepare for a career and this kind of stuff, and specifically around software that you would recommend jumping into, and all of those things. And Furby, I don't know if you have stuff that you definitely love to recommend students play around with. You mentioned a couple already, but can't hurt to reiterate.
I think I'll hold off to the end to answer that one because I am also interested in some of these answers.
Fair enough.
What software to learn? I think it's a hard one to answer because the field is so big. So I don't blame people for having, questions about it, because, the first thing I would ask anybody that asked me that is like, what do you want to do? Right? Because there are so many different disciplines these days in computer graphics. Like the time of the generalist, like from the early days of computer graphics, is kind of over, I think, right? Because now you have people who do nothing but like cloth sim for an entire show. Whereas before it's like, you had to do cloth sim and the hair sim and the, whatever. So I guess, first I would say learn about the different disciplines. What are you interested in? And then find a package that a lot of people in that discipline use, like animation people use Maya. Effects people use Houdini, that kind of thing.
I would agree with that. But also say that I know a lot of places are moving toward like using Unreal for rendering and going to a more USD based workflow. So maybe learning those kinds of technologies is also good to help you, have an edge, I guess. Universal Scene Description, sorry, USD. It's a Pixar's scene description format that is an open source project, so you could check it out if you wanted to.
Yeah, and it helps you describe scenes outside of any specific DCC, so it makes interchange between all these different packages easier.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think another great point is in the game engine space, in like Unity and Unreal, both of them being free, like you can a lot quicker kind of get up and going and do all of those things. So if you want to see what it's like to light a scene, see what it's like to animate something, basically, like sometimes if you don't have an idea of what you're doing, do basic make a scene in Unreal, make a scene in Unity kind of tutorials, and that can help you put some context to learning about a lot of the different disciplines, I would say. Those didn't used to exist either, so the world is constantly changing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and having that instant feedback is really nice versus waiting for renders to come back.
Yeah.
And all that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, Unity is a good one. I would say Blender if you're interested in the modeling aspect of it, because it is open source. And the hotkeys you're able to change, like they have convert it to the Maya hotkeys if you want to get used to that idea of switching between different pieces of software, and they're going to behave a little different, but at the end of the day, it's still a modeling software. It's still going to have a texturing package. And check with your university and see if, like at least for Unity or Unreal, see if they give you access to like the Lynda classes that are associated with it, or to the Unity Pro accounts where you get there's free tutorials, and then there's more in-depth tutorials that like will track your progress and walk you through like start to finish end products almost too.
Yeah, and I think that you hit on a great point there, Furby, of like, at the end of the day, like there's a lot of different tools that do similar things different ways. And learning one basically means that you learned the others because it's conceptual. You know, if you can paint one way, you can probably paint another way. If you can code in one language, it's going to be faster to learn to code in a different language. So those foundational skills, don't get too stuck on what to learn and something.
Yeah,
you know?
and if you're not really familiar with the disciplines, just do something very simple. It's like a bouncing ball, right? So you can model a sphere because that's one of the default things that every package can do, right? And then you can animate it and you can light it and you can make it a different color. And you'll kind of see what all the different steps are in the process and maybe find something that really resonates with you.
Yeah. Like the Pixar lamp short is a great example. You take a bouncing ball and you turned it into something much more complex and tell a lot more of a story as your skills develop.
And the last thing quickly that we can kind of go over is, you know, sort of what companies expect out of applying for a technical director position. Again, it's complicated, but you know, let's say specifically like a pipeline TD, like what Tracy did at Blue Sky.
What do they expect from candidates?
Yeah. How would you get started? What can someone expect out of, you know, an application like that?
Mm-hmm. So I think usually when we're interviewing for candidates for this position, especially if they're junior straight out of university, it's really about the projects that they worked on in school or on their free time, and being able to discuss them in depth and like as far as technical challenges, how you implemented it, what your next steps were, and stuff like that. I think that's usually what draws us to somebody, is like how passionate they were about the project that they did, and how in detail they can talk about it. And then also, like, you know, if they have had Maya experience, or if they have written tools for Maya or Houdini, or you know, worked on a project with artists, helping make tools for them, and maybe if that's in school or on your free time. I think those are things that we look at.
Yeah, that's great.
I think, you know, for people out of school trying to get a TD job, chances are you'll become an assistant TD first, and sort of, you know, get to like learn the ropes without having to have like a ton of experience. You know, having a good foundation in something like Python, because it's just so ubiquitous across the industry, would be very helpful. And, you know, decent knowledge of one DCC, because like Carol said, the concepts apply across packages, right? Modeling is modeling. It's just sort of the specific sort of dialect might be a little bit different. but somebody who understands the basics is always welcome.
And that kind of is a great segue into a closing sort of thing is, you know, we at the Academy Software Foundation really believe in the open source community and nature of a lot of these things. And if you're interested in getting involved and just trying your hand at something, start putting up some Python skills, some programming skills, dive in, learn about the ASWF project, see if there's one that interests you, and come talk to us about it. So I want to say thanks a ton to Tracy, Mallory, and Furby for your time tonight. It was really great, and look forward to talking to you again soon. Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.